Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Becoming the Sanctuary. We are on episode 12. I can't believe it. And if this is your first time here, though, my name is Kelly, founder of Thrivewell Estate and Thrivewell Hub, our first physical branch located in Whitensville, Massachusetts. This podcast is a space where we explore healing, embodiment, emotional awareness, creativity, human connection, and what it actually means to return to yourself while still living inside a very overwhelming world. Now, last week we talked about what it means to hold two truths at once. We talked about disappointment and hope living side by side, and how healing isn't pretending everything is okay. It's learning to keep moving while honoring what's true. And as I sat with that conversation over the past week, I realized there was another lesson hiding underneath it, one that I think many of us can relate to. Because after everything that happened, so many people reached out. Friends checked in, family offered encouragement, complete strangers sent messages reminding me to keep going. And every single time, my first instinct was to say, I'm okay. You don't have to do that. I'll figure it out. It made me wonder, why is receiving sometimes harder than giving? Why is it so easy to show up for everyone else, yet so uncomfortable when someone wants to show up for us? Somewhere along the way, many of us learned that being capable meant carrying everything ourselves. We learned that asking for help felt like weakness, that rest had to be earned, and that accepting love, kindness, or even recognition somehow made us uncomfortable. But what if that's not strength? What if that's survival? So today, I want to explore something I think many of us carry without even realizing it: the art, and maybe the challenge, of learning to receive. All right, let's dive in. So, I want to talk about the independence that we celebrate. Now, throughout this podcast, you have probably heard multiple themes, right? That healing is a very fine line, um, how much we are the mountain ourselves, right? How much of the inner work really has to do with the outer world that we create for ourselves. But another common theme that I try to tend to talk to about recurringly on this podcast is the culture that we're in, and then the expectations that that puts on us. Because, like I've said before, we live in a culture that celebrates independence. I mean, think about in your own life or just what you've seen others go through, celebrating the fact of I did it myself and I don't need anybody. And being self-made, right? And self-made being on your own is really admired. And I do believe that part of that has a level of truth to it because independence is healthy, right? Um, Being independent to be able to experience this world without needing so many other people, in the sense of you literally wouldn't be able to do that without them, right? But then also, and that is as you enter into that, when you can't do anything without certain people in your life, like you really think your life is over, that's codependency. But independence in ourselves, having the ability to make our own money or provide our own security, and I don't just mean financial, being able to take care of ourselves. That's all important independence, but hyper independence is something very different. And it's something I'm quite familiar with. Hyper independence really is that you no longer allow yourself to rely on anybody else. And trust me when I say it's not a healthy place to be. And with that hyper independence, it also comes with not being able to ask for help. Anybody who is walking in recovery and has sobriety knows how important it is to ask for help. There has been at least one point in your life, if not many, that asking for help saved your life. It was a matter of life or death, literally. I know that I experienced that when I first knew I needed help and going into treatment. If I didn't ask for help that day, I can almost guarantee you for a fact that I would not be here today. So the question is, when did asking for help start feeling unsafe? And when did being the strong one become your identity? And I think the reason why I wanted to talk about this topic, um, why it is so difficult to learn how to receive, is because if you have experienced um, anything physically with Thrivewell, and especially with taking our archetype quiz, and for those of you who don't know, the Thrivewell core philosophy is a curated system that meets you where you are to help guide you through your healing, and it's based on trusting your own body, your own intuition, and really guiding you through that healing. And part of that, I created a quiz. It's not a personality quiz. It's an honest reflection of where you are right now so that you can understand what you need to move forward, to move through the season of your life. And and if you haven't experienced it yet, the quiz, a little hint here to what I've been teasing out there, and I'm still struggling with building it. If you haven't been able to physically take it yet, your opportunity will come soon. And that's all I'll say about that. But why I brought that up is because I have had hundreds of people take that quiz since I made it. And I do not share people's results specifically. That is something for them to journey through themselves, and it's their story to share. But I will tell you, without getting into any sort of specifics about anyone in particular, that if I went through and counted, because I have these archetype cards that go out, and that's the only way I would know what is the highest archetype, but I wouldn't even need to count it because I can already tell you. I would say about half of the people who have taken that quiz have come up as the nurturer archetype healing pathway. And as you learn about the Thrival core philosophy, the archetypes are really interesting to work with in our healing because the whole point of these healing pathways is to find the balance within it. And like everything in life, everything has balance, right? Light and dark, evil and good, yin and yang. Archetype pathways are the same. They have the shadow and the light. And if you haven't guessed it, the nurturer's shadow is depletion. Imagine that your nourishment for yourself, whether that be your physical body or your soul, right? Um, the cup needs to be full for that to be in balance. And it's not to say that we can't do stuff for other people. It's just we need to give them the overflow. And if there's somebody that we take from our own cup and we give them that, it's somebody who's going to help us refill our cup afterwards too. So I think doing this episode, not only for myself after what this last week has been, and there's been other things that have happened personally that I'm just keeping private, and it's a family matter. So, but going through so much after, in a sense, getting the rug pulled out from under me last week, had me really thinking about how many of us are in this boat that it's so hard to not only receive but to treat ourselves like we would other people. And that's the whole thing about the nurturer, is finding the balance of the oxygen mask reference, where you can't help anybody if you're passed out. You have to put your mask on first, right? So not only are we struggling to do that, but then when we're depleted, we're struggling to ask for help on top of that. So why did asking for help feel unsafe? Well, if I had to take a guess about from my own perspective, and again, like I said, the culture that we're in, asking for help can be looked at, or what we think can be looked at, as a sign of weakness. And I think that when we start talking about, survival versus strength, I think, even though I'm still practicing it myself, because it's become easier to ask for help. And when I ask for help, I know it gets easier because when people in my life are asking me for help, I'm showing up for them. So that's the balance here too. But just remember that cup. Only certain people get parts of your own cup because they come and help you fill it. So I think that asking for help is actually the biggest sign of strength, not weakness. I've done that in my career. When I don't know how to do something, I never just guess. I try and research and see if the information is out there or, documented. And if you're in a bigger company, with the SOPs and everything that comes along with that. But if I can't find it there, I even go further and ask, my boss or different departments. But then in my life too, when I'm really struggling emotionally, or it's no secret where I'm at right now. So sometimes that help is financial help, which is some of the hardest help for me to ask for still. But knowing that I'm good on my word has helped me with that, because it's not something that I'm just taking and taking and taking and I'm going to give. So all these things that can help us with practicing asking for help. But we have to get through this idea of how we're perceived, because when we do talk about that hyper independence, it often develops because at one point it protected us, right? Speaking for myself, I became hyper independent because I felt that if I was became hyper independent, even though I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, I would never be in the position to rely on anybody, because, and not saying my family, mostly was old relationships, that I relying on them for, emotional security or feeling loved, or just, having things done to help me or for me, I would be let down. So I developed this hyper independence because if I never had to rely on anybody else, there was never a chance of being disappointed and being let down. But like I said, with my own recovery, um, one, hyper independence and recovery do not mix, because once you isolate and you try to do everything yourself and you're handling all your problems yourself, that's a lot for one human being. And recovery taught me I couldn't heal alone. And building Thrivewell has taught me, honestly, the same lesson, that a lot of people see this as something that I built. And it is true. I did build the idea and the foundation and the design aspect of it and how I wanted it to feel. But Thrivewell, it was far from being built fully with just me. There's been many people, um, from my boyfriend to my parents to my boyfriend's parents to my siblings to his siblings to cousins and friends, and I mean the list is endless. It's absolutely endless, because there's absolutely no way that I could become the woman that I am today, build what I built, and go through what I'm going through without a ton of help. Because somewhere along the way, being capable slowly became carrying everything. And I realized that before I started building Thrivewell, I couldn't. This was too big. This was, um, and I mean somewhere along the way of my earlier journey. And and I just knew, right? And I think that with healing and life itself, carrying everything alone is just a recipe for disaster. And and I don't want to insult people that think independence is important, because it is, but healthy independence. um and it has a lot to do with ego too. But I want you to ask yourself, what are you protecting yourself from by doing everything alone? Think about it. I'm thinking about it right now. When I get into that mode, because it still pops up that, whether I don't think honestly, now that I'm thinking, I know I just thought about that very quickly, but I don't think I'm protecting myself from anything. Well, I guess I could be, but it's more shame. It's more protecting my image, I guess, how I'm perceived because I'm 40 years old and I shouldn't need, right? I shouldn't need to ask for help in certain areas. But I'm not just 40 years old with a career that has been the same for years and I'm in these routines and habits, right? I started a new career. I started a business. I'm in a relationship that's almost gosh, probably, coming up on 2 years and I think it's just when we when we think about where we should be, remember what we talk about with should. Should had become and still does when that word comes up, the biggest critic of my life. Because sometimes what we call strength is that self-protection. But that's where we have to really look at what am I protecting myself against? Because sometimes what we're protecting ourselves against is healthy, right? Like sometimes there's a lesson in there for us to learn, and sometimes we need to have our back up against the wall and feel that a little bit. But we want to get more into why receiving feels so uncomfortable. And I think receiving and rest go hand in hand, right? Because rest is what we're receiving for ourselves, and receiving is what others do for us. Because how many times in your own life have you thought about when somebody offers help and your immediate response, I'm fine. I've got it. Don't worry about me. I I know whenever I say the words, I'm fine, just like that, I'm the opposite of fine. I'm the opposite. And certainly and I know that other people in recovery can relate to this too and probably beyond that. When I say the words I've got it, oh my goodness, I do not got it. And one thing I know for sure especially when it comes to my sobriety, I've never really got it. It's the second I start really acting like I do got it is when I let my guard down too much and all of that all of my demons are just waiting for me to rest on that laurel. But the question is why? Why do we do that? And if I had to reflect on my own life and how I felt when that was going on, I think fear of being a burden, fear of owing someone something. The big one for me is fear of disappointing people and fear they'll eventually leave anyway, right? Because if we get used to being taken care of, that's my favorite thing to talk about because God forbid I get used to being taken care of, right? But those are a lot of the issues that I still carry, um, that I'm going to be abandoned, that the help that I need will somehow become too much. And people are just going to say, I'm too much work. But if I was just taking and taking and taking and never being there for my loved ones or my partner or my friends, then I could slightly understand that. But it's all about this give and take. And I think if I thought about it one layer deeper, I think receiving means surrendering a little bit of control. Because when we not only ask for help, but we receive help, it means we lost control enough that um or we think that we lost control enough that the outcome didn't turn out to be where we wanted it to go. But and when we help others, that's letting us stay in control. And if you haven't gotten the theme yet either, and I'm sorry to break it to you, but The biggest part of healing is realizing that we are not in control. There's so many phone calls, I'm sure so many of us, myself included, can think of that completely change the trajectory of our day, our week, our life. Um, so so like I said, we can have control over some things, mostly our reactions, but the idea that we are surrendering that control, if we can understand that we're not really in control in the first place, receiving becomes a lot easier because receiving requires vulnerability and it requires trust. And I want you to think about that. Think about that in yourself because what is harder for you, giving or receiving? And I haven't met many people that giving is the harder of the two. Quite the opposite. Most people that I know, and like I said, myself included, and the people that I see coming in here, and if you've been in the nurture pathway, you know that receiving is actually very difficult for you. I know it's difficult for me. Like I said, I'm getting more used to it, and it's getting a little bit easier because I've put myself in a position that there's times I have to ask for help, um, in many aspects of my life. But I also want to talk about how often we reject support we secretly wish we had, right? And and I think it yeah, it just has so much to do with how we're perceived and we think this image that we have to put up. And it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors if I'm being honest, because receiving it's we don't have to sit there and wish for this support because the other side of this that I think so many people including myself um don't realize. Remember what we just talked about, giving. A lot of us don't have a problem with giving, and a lot of people want to help. So let them. Let them help you. Because especially if it's somebody that really cares about you, and that's who we're really talking about too. They want to help. They don't want to see you in pain or struggling. And allow them to help to the best of their ability. Because receiving isn't just about accepting help. It's learning to receive love. And, bringing it back to recovery in the traditional sense for a bit, I want to tell you a story about a conversation that I had with an aunt of mine. And she was, doing a lot of research and interviews of people who were struggling with substance abuse. And she really found a common denominator in everyone that she talked to. And it was the piece that they were missing was that love, right? That unconditional love. And that's, if they had that, then it would change, their situation or their addiction or alcoholism. And as I was talking to her and I was really listening to her, and this is someone who doesn't, she doesn't struggle with the same substance abuse issues that I do, thankfully. And I was really listening to her and I said, "Well, yeah, that's the first half of the equation." And she looked at me a little confused because what else could there be? What else beyond unconditional love and support could possibly be there? But it's on the fact of receiving, right? For us to truly get help, and for that unconditional love to work, we have to be able to know that we're worthy of receiving it. And that's a big part of the equation that beyond the traditional recovery circles with substance abuse issues, I think a lot of people struggle with receiving compliments. I think of when I'm when I'm complimenting others or when I get a compliment myself on how I look or a dress that I just bought or anything. I'm like, oh, instead of just saying thank you, it's this very long-winded reason of how long it took to look the way I look or every excuse under the sun to not just receive that love and say thank you. Um, other receiving encouragement, receiving someone believing in you. My gosh, does that bring me back when I think about that to early recovery in the treatment center. And I can't tell you how many people who were in there as counselors and they were there as staff and they would just tell us, I will believe in you until you believe in you. I will love you until you love you. And that's how simple it had to be. Um, but even though it's the most simplest statement, it has the biggest impact. Um, because there's a lot of times that we minimize a lot of what's going on, right? And why do we do that? Why do we minimize? We say things like it wasn't a big deal, anyone would have done it, or, I'm still figuring out, I'm going to figure it out. So, why does criticism often feel easier to believe than kindness, right? And not for everybody and not at all times of our life. But I will tell you, I think that has a lot to do with what we're used to. When you're in a spot where we can hear a lot of criticism, like some people, I don't know, maybe we know what to do with that more than we know what to do with kindness. And I'll tell you, as a society, we've set the bar pretty low on kindness. Because when I just show basic empathy or basic compassion, that kindness can feel very, very uncomfortable because we live in a very tough world. But for us to heal and to continue on our healing journey, we must learn to receive love and receive love from your partner, your family, your friends, your community. Because sometimes people aren't trying to fix us, they're simply trying to love us. Question is, like I said, can we let them? Can we simply say thank you without explaining why we don't deserve it? Because love isn't the only thing many of us struggle to receive. Like I said, very similar to receiving rest. And I know we've talked about this before, but I think it just really has such a place in this episode as well. But we'll just talk about it for a bit because rest isn't a reward, it's a biological need. Say that with me. Rest is not a reward, it's a biological need. Yet, we treat it like it was some big dessert. Like we've talked about, we say to ourselves continuously, I'll rest when after the project, after work slows down, after the kids grow up, after I make more money, after I clean the house, all these things that we keep saying to ourselves about why we need to earn the rest. And it's something that I actively work on. I think if I remember doing that episode, if I remember correctly, I even said in that episode, once I get all this stuff done, I can rest. And I even caught myself within the episode where it was the entire topic. Um, because it connects back with many things that we've talked about. Our nervous system, boundaries, taking the middle road. Because we have to ask ourselves, why do we wait until collapse before giving ourselves permission to rest? It's one of my biggest questions, like I said, for myself. And I do believe that is a hurdle that once we collectively get over that, there will be a very big ripple effect. But we do have a lot of work to do before we collectively get there. Because when you're receiving rest, it means believing you don't have to earn your worth through exhaustion. And burnout, it doesn't have to be a badge of honor like we've been treating it. And restoration should happen before the breakdown. But receiving also applies to something we don't often think about. Receiving visibility, right? Letting our authentic self and the help that we need become visible. And I can tell you that becoming visible has changed my life in so many ways. But part of what I still work on is the perfectionism in myself and the smoke and mirrors that I honestly created for myself for a long time and still fight that urge, right? Like I said, I'm 40 years old and I have a lot of expectations that I put on myself of how I should be right now and where I should be. But that's why I wanted to do everything so publicly, why I wanted to share my story while building Thrivewell, why I wanted to start this podcast, why hosting workshops and speaking in front of people and putting so much of my work on social media. Um, and when you launch something that you've poured your heart into and you make it that visible, right? Like I have a blog that I've been writing for over a year. When Thrivewell Estate, the brand, was trying to be a physical location, and I have documented the entire journey and still do to this day. It's more of kind of where I'm at with things, and not so much because the building phase as of now not over. That's not the right way to put it, because I'm still very much building the business and the brand, but the letters have slowed down. But it's only because now I'm carrying the social media presence. I'm carrying the email subscriber list. I'm carrying the business itself. And when you are that visible and your business and yourself as a person is not an overnight success, that visibility feels very vulnerable. Um, and and we want people to see our work, but we're afraid they'll truly see us, right? Because a lot of times, I know in my own experience, when I was showing work, I was showing the finished product. And with this amount of visibility and how much I put out there, I have some people, and it's not coming from a bad place whatsoever. Um, a lot of it can seem like I'm changing plans or I'm pivoting or I don't know what I'm doing. But surprise, I don't. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm learning every day. I'm learning as I go. I think if you ever waited until you were fully ready to whether to start a business or start your healing journey, you'll never do it because you're never truly ready. Part of the process is the process itself, right? The how strong we get. I know for an absolute fact that I am not the same woman that I was a year ago, and I'm far stronger, and I ask for a lot more help because when you like we said, when you become that visible, why am I struggling with that word? Visibility um, means receiving praise and receiving criticism and receiving misunderstanding. It means receiving all of that. And to be visible, there we go. That was a struggle. Words are hard. Um, we have to be prepared to receive the good and the bad. But like I said, and when you aren't worried about how people perceive you, that visibility gets easier. Because when you receive criticism, if it's not constructive, you just let it pass right by. But if it is productive, that you listen, right? And there's a lot of aspect on whether it's living life or starting a business. So much of it goes hand in hand. There's this common saying that you hear a lot, you know what you should do. And as hard as that is, right? Because I don't like the word should, but sometimes being visible in what you're doing in your life, you might get ideas from people that are actually helpful. and they are constructive. And it might be something that you haven't thought about before because you're getting different vantage points. But we have to understand that you cannot help people while remaining completely invisible. And you you also can't receive that help being remaining completely invisible. And visibility, it's not ego. It's service. Sometimes also receiving visibility means believing that your voice matters, believing that your story matters. Knowing that with our vulnerability gives others permission to be vulnerable as well. And vulnerability is not a bad thing. And that is not only one word that I used to not be able to say. It's a word that I used to not be able to feel. And now when I am at my most vulnerable, I actually feel the most safe, because when I'm being the most vulnerable, it means that I'm being the most honest. And I that is something I am very proud of my own growth and my healing journey. But maybe the hardest thing to receive is letting people help you, like we talked about. And I want to think back to last week's episode, and I can tell you with 100% certainty that how these last, 5 or 6 days have gone. I'm only still standing because of the support that I have and the help that I have received, um, between multiple aspects of my life. And to the people that reached out, thank you, thank you, thank you, because those are the words of encouragement. Something as simple as a text, it has the ability to change someone's entire day, whether they get out of bed in the morning or not. And just knowing that there's other people out there thinking about us, and even though they might not be able to solve our problems, they're there to help us in any way that they can. And there's, my family, my friends, my boyfriend Matt, Charlotte next to me, you know, um, my boyfriend's son, just his laugh, and seeing him, and the support, that the joy that he brings me is something that helps me continue on, and beyond my personal circle, the customers and people who trust me to sign up for these workshops and to come in here and to take the quiz, and for all of you listening. And what's wild to me is that, I don't, it's not the quality. I'm not the quality. It's not the quantity. It is the quality. But I have people listening from all over the world, and that blows my mind. So the fact that people give me something to show up to every week and be accountable for, and even beyond that, the community that's building through and because of Thrivewell. Those are so many aspects of my life that help me get through the hard times and want to be more vulnerable, like I said, and be more visible. And I think the more that we share, like I said, share our story, the easier it is for people to understand where we're at, and when we do need help. Because I don't know about you, but I don't understand for myself why is saying thank you um harder than saying I'm fine. And I don't understand that because I'm it's funny with this podcast, I reflect on it in live time. Um because man, that is hard to say, is because the thank you comes after the help. But like I said, I've gotten more comfortable with it. Um and it's important for me to be more comfortable with that and be as strong as I can, so that I can also help others and help the ones that have helped me and help the ones that still need help. Because remember, receiving help is not weakness. It deepens connection. And when you doubt this in yourself, I I try to always bring it back to nature, right? Trees receive the rain, flowers receive the sunlight, rivers receive streams, and forests, they share nutrients beneath the ground. Nothing in nature survives alone. So why do we believe we should? Because maybe allowing someone to help is also giving them the opportunity to love you, right? Like allow them to do that. Let them do that. Because maybe receiving is one of the final lessons in healing, right? That is final, but it will continue to pop up and that lesson will land harder and harder every time. Because in this culture where everything is so productive, giving feels productive, right? Showing up for other people feels productive, but receiving feels vulnerable. Receiving says, I am worthy. I don't have to earn care. I don't have to carry everything alone. So, with that, I think I've been rambling long enough now. And you can tell by the tone of my voice that receiving help has been very good for me in comparison to how I sounded during last week's episode. But I want to challenge you. I want to challenge everybody who's listening to accept one compliment this week. Let someone buy you a coffee. Ask for help. Take the nap. Simply say thank you. Because those challenges, when you are not in a space where you're used to receiving love, right, and receiving help, those challenges are going to be very difficult. But I really push you to try and reflect on how every living thing in nature survives by both giving and receiving when you are struggling with those challenges. Just really sit with that and it will help you because the more I've leaned into nature and understanding the seasons and how everything works together and nothing in nature feels bad about receiving what they need because part of what is in nature is also giving. So it's that full circle. But as a final takeaway, I want you to think about this that perhaps healing isn't just learning how to love others better. Perhaps it's finally believing you're worthy of receiving the same love yourself. So, with that, thank you all so much again for spending another Friday with me. I know I said it last week and I'll say it every single week. I don't take this podcast for granted. I don't take any of you for granted. I find this I am absolutely honored and so thankful that I find myself in the position that I am in, and that's why I want to continue my own healing journey and continue to get stronger and be more visible and be more vulnerable, but not only be stronger but also show my weakness. And because showing your weakness is not weakness, it's a strength because we all have weak points and we all have tough times. But what are we doing about it? Right? And in the meantime, until next week, be gentle with yourself. Let someone love you. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply receive. We'll see you next week.